right, so good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name's Angelito Tenorio. I'll be the host for this afternoon. I'm from Wisconsin Conservation Voters, and we are grateful today to have the Lieutenant Governor with us. So thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for joining us this afternoon.
Hey, yeah, thanks for taking the time out to host this event. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yes, so my first question for you, something we like to ask people here on Earth Talk is like, how did you first get involved in organizing? How did you first get involved in politics?
Yeah, so my first foray into organizing was after college. I went to work on a campaign in Louisiana. It was kind of weird how I got there. It was this program that took people who were interested in organizing, and it kind of just dispersed them out across the country into some marginal districts. And I ended up in Shreveport, Louisiana. Then I ended up going down to Natchitoches, Louisiana, 30 days after. Natchitoches is Louisiana's oldest city. It's a really great place. I've been there to visit since that campaign. But we lost the race, and that brought me back home to Milwaukee. And worked in Mayor Barrett's office for a little bit. This was 11 years ago now, so back in 2009. And long story short, I connected with MICA, which is Milwaukee's Inner City Congregations Ally for Hope. I met Reverend Willie Briscoe at one of the Act 10 protests, and we had a chance to get familiar with each other. And there just so happened to be an opening for the position of lead organizer at MICA. And I applied for the job, and I got it. And there we organized around issues of jobs and economic development, education, immigration reform, and treatment instead of prison. But when I first got into MICA, one of the coalitions they were a part of was the Cleaner Valley Coalition. And that was a conglomerate of organizations that were working with a coal burning power plant. Just given the disparate impacts that it had on the surrounding community. So a lot of different organizations stepped up to the plate, and that was a fight that the organization won. I wish I could take more credit for it, but that was already in motion before I was on board. But I had a chance to learn more about environmental hazards and environmental determinants of health.
Awesome. How did you tell us about your experiences when you first got involved in the assembly? And what inspired you to first run for office?
Yeah, so the assembly was definitely a challenge. We were deep in the minority, but I can go back to my days at MICA. It was the work that I did with the organization. It was the work that the organization was involved in, the challenges that the organization was taking on. I can go back to those four issues: jobs and economic development, education, immigration reform, and treatment instead of prison. Those are four issues that are deeply impacted at the state level. And from calling, having letter writing petitions to elected officials, and not necessarily getting the response that you think that you should be getting, especially when the people in the districts that many Milwaukee area legislators represent, given the harm and damage that's done to their constituents, we didn't feel like we were getting the response. And I decided that, well, I can sit and complain about what an elected official is doing, or I can step up and run on my own. And that's what I did. Don't get mad, get elected. And that's a thing that stuck with me because, of course, we have to have pressure on the outside. We have to have people organized who are stepping up and demanding change. But we also have to have people who are ready to step up and fill those seats.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I think something really cool about like your rise in politics, especially in Wisconsin, is like seeing how far you've come from like your beginnings as an organizer, but now as like Lieutenant Governor of our state. Something I'm very interested also is like your work on the environment and like your vision for Wisconsin. So I know you're doing a lot of work with the Climate Change Task Force now. Tell us about what's going on and the hearings and the responses and the vision you hope to see in Wisconsin moving forward.
I am so excited about the Climate Change Task Force. I think about it because we went 8 years without one during the former administration. And this was an issue that got none of the bandwidth that it deserved, none of the attention that it deserved. I'm talking to people who understand, who know, who get it. But the fact is, with climate change being scrubbed from websites, prohibiting state agencies from talking objectively about climate change, that presented us with a real problem. Wisconsin was a climate change leader, a leader in addressing climate change, a leader in promoting renewable energy, and we lost that place with the last administration. And this is one of the issues that was central to me. And even when I was outside of the legislature, I had a chance to work on a number of issues related to renewable energy and conservation. And during the transition after we won the election, that was one of the recommendations that some people on my staff made sure to put in the forefront, is that we reconstitute the Climate Change Task Force. And I'm so excited that we're doing it, because we're bringing people from all walks of life, people who have people who are impacted by climate change, and honestly, some people who contribute to climate change are a part of that task force, because too often we have conversations around each other or over each other. But this is a way for people to be in the room to come up with the most fair, just, and equitable policies and set of recommendations. We have students, we have advocacy groups, we have some small farmers, but we also have utilities on that task force as well, because it's important to at least to have their input. And some utilities in the state, their goals actually were beating the state goals before the governor signed the executive order to put us on the path to 100% renewable energy. Prior to that, with the last administration, we still had some utility providers that made that commitment on their own. So we want to hear from them about how they can, what their plan is, and how can they help other people get on board with a just transition. And so the list goes on and on and on. And we also have, regional representation as well, people from all over the state. And so some of the public hearings that we just had and some of the task force meetings, we always bring in presenters. And we brought in the city of River Falls to the last one. And, I didn't even know that the city of River Falls, their operations are 100% renewable already. And that was an exciting thing to learn. And it was an exciting thing to have presented to the task force, because, that is the type of leadership that we want to put on display to show other places around the state, everywhere around the state, quite frankly, that this is possible. It's not some pipe dream. And it's also imperative that we move in this direction for the future of this planet.
Totally. I think the action that and the lengths that we've gone regarding climate change, because even years ago we couldn't even talk about climate change, but now we have the statewide task force to solely address it. I think that's really important, and a really important initiative, because climate change truly is the most pressing issue of our time, and it's important that we take action and do everything we can to combat it. You mentioned equity. I think when we talk about climate change, it's really important that we talk about the racial justice aspect about it. So can you talk a little bit about climate justice and how that connects to Black Lives Matter? Because I believe in intersectionality. Could you touch on that a little bit, and what you hope to see come out of the movement going on around the country for Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, so it's important that we center all of our discussions around equity and environmental justice. I want to make that the cornerstone of the task force, because we run the risk of keeping people in harm's way, even after a transition is made, if we don't take into account what the most vulnerable or marginalized populations among us are experiencing. And I remember, I want to say it had to be about 4 years ago, there's a Sierra Club mailer, and Michael Broom, president of the National Sierra Club, he just went out there and he made the connection in this in one of the newsletters, and he stated very clearly that Black Lives Matter, and it's important because communities of color, Black, Brown, Indigenous communities feel the impact of climate change or environmental related disasters far worse than other communities. And if we're going to move forward, we have to think about, we'll say, for example, solar, how people are priced out of having being able to put solar panels on their homes. How do we make it more possible for communities to be more resilient? How do we make it more possible for communities to be able to uplift themselves? And one thing too, I think about one story, and can't remember the last time I talked about this, but we'll use plastic bags for an example, right? It's one of the worst stuff out there, and we're a state that has a ban on plastic bag bans. And I think about Black community, lower income communities, and I was a kid. Had to be like 8 years old or something, and I was at the store with my mom, and I bought something, and the cashier's like, "Do you need a bag?" And I said, "No, I don't need a bag." And my mom told me, "You better take the bag." And I'm like, "Why do I need to take the bag?" And so we got in the car, and she's like, "I don't need people to think you in here stealing." And that's something that a lot of communities have to deal with. That wasn't just my mom being over protective or overly cautious about the situation. That's the reality for a whole lot of people. So it's something as small as that, where growing up thinking that I needed to have a plastic bag anytime that I left a convenience store, it creates an even larger problem with so many other people.
Totally. Yeah. I think something also really important that we talk about and how it intersects to like racial equity, the environment, climate change is coronavirus, COVID-19. So how do you see like the intersections between COVID-19, racial equity, and the environment too? And like, what are we doing to move forward?
So what I found is that the same people that deny one most likely deny that all three exist, or there is a need to address all three. But I don't always see the people that support one supporting all three. So we still got a little bit of work to do to make those connections. COVID-19 has come in and it has exploited the pre-existing inequality that exists, whether it's lack of access to healthcare, whether it is, again, those social or environmental determinants of health, given areas where people may be subject to environmental hazards that cause respiratory illnesses that make COVID-19 that much more severe and ultimately can lead to death in so many folks. When we look at the disproportionate rate of death in which communities that happens, I think it's important for us also to take a deeper look at what the environmental situation is in those neighborhoods and those communities with those individuals specifically. And environmental racism has long been a problem. I talked about the Cleaner Valley Coalition because those coal burning power plants aren't in wealthy communities. When people want to build a mine, they're not building mines in wealthy communities. And so that is why environmental justice has to be the focal point. And I think there is a direct connection between the movement that we're seeing all across this country, all across the globe for that matter, with the environmental movement, understanding that if the life of Black people, if the life of any marginalized community is going to matter on the other end of this, it is important that we address the very real economic concerns. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are dealing with it right on the front line, they don't always have the time to advocate on their own behalf. If you're struggling to put food on the table, issues of the environment aren't necessarily going to be front and center, even though they do impact your everyday life. But that's not always a connection that's made. We talk about climate change. I think that a lot of the work that we need to do to help get more people on board is to change what the visual of climate change is, because it's not always relatable. Like, polar bears and, my deepest sympathy, right? This is a global issue. We have to address it as such. The fact that polar ice caps are melting, polar bears are, on melting icebergs, that signals the larger global problem, but it's not personalized for people. And a lot of folks who are severely impacted by climate change, that's not a message or a visual that's going to resonate with them, because chances are they haven't been around polar bears, they haven't been around icebergs and melting ice caps. That doesn't truly get to a person who has so many other struggles to deal with in their life.
Totally. So what do you think is a way for like so that we could connect with people? How do we make it more personal to people in Wisconsin when we talk about climate change?
Yeah, I think talking about price of food, cost of goods and services is always gonna open people's eyes and get people to pay attention. And as we see more extreme weather conditions, more extreme weather patterns, that is going to cause the price of food to go up. And you can look at storms and talk to people about their own livelihoods. I've done storm damage tours and seen barns that have been swept away in tornadoes, and literally speaking with farmers with tears in their eyes, not knowing if they're going to rebuild or not. And even though a lot of people may not be ready to have a climate change conversation in that particular at that particular moment, which is totally understandable, we can still have conversations about how these things are happen as a result of damage that's been done by humans to the environment. And these 100-year storms are getting way more frequent. These 100-year storms are every other year and every year. This prohibits this. We look at last year, the never-ending rainy season that we had. It prolonged the process for people to grow crops, and again, that has an impact on local economies. It has an impact on the price of food. It has an impact on people's livelihood.
Yes. Something that we touched on, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, but it relates, is environmental justice. Something that we really work on here at Wisconsin Conservation Voters is clean drinking water. So could you talk about the efforts we're taking to address clean drinking water? Because it affects all parts of the state, whether it's lead contamination, nitrate contamination, PFAS. So what are we doing as a state to address this issue?
Yeah, the governor created new positions to address PFAS contamination and to address lead contamination issue. And we also, in our Department of Natural Resources, has been strengthened and has more oversight authority when it comes to permits now. A lot of the work that we're doing or need to do can be reduced to simple tweaks, just given the inactivity or the intentional devastation from the last administration. So now understanding and actually accepting that there are problems that do exist and problems that we need to fix it was the first step in that direction. But coming up with a plan with our Department of Natural Resources, making sure that there's adequate staff to address these concerns is the other step. And we're letting science guide our decisions. We're not governing on a whim. We're not governing as we feel as we feel these issues do or do not matter. We're looking at the raw data, the numbers, the fact that Lake Superior is warming up quicker than the rest of the Great Lakes, the fact that our trout streams are getting a little bit warmer, and that is going to impact trout life because they cannot survive in warm water, which has an impact on rural economies. It has an impact on tourism to the state as well. And with all these things in mind, I can just go back and say that science is going to lead the day.
Yeah. What does tell me more about what it looks like for the state government when we're trying to hold corporate polluters accountable? Because oftentimes it's these big industries that are polluting our water and polluting our environment. So tell me more about efforts on that.
Yes, those large companies get away scot-free. They've been essentially given a pass to do whatever they want to do in the name of the economy, but that's no more. And that's why, every election matters. Every election is important. And I'm glad that we do have an attorney general who's ready to and willing to take on these corporate polluters, because that's a problem. Not only should they have to clean up the mess, they should also have to pay for all the damage that's being done. So a lot of that work happens in court. And if you have an attorney general that is not willing to accept that climate change is a real thing, is not willing to go to bat for our natural environment, then you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, and that's really important. Something you touched on is who we have elected. That's something we really work on with Wisconsin conservation voters. Like elections have consequences. So I want to talk to you about like what that looks like from your role within the state government. Like when it comes to like our democracy, because our democracy is so important. A healthy democracy is a healthy environment. They're one and the same. So I want to talk about efforts on your end and the state government and what we're doing.
Yeah, so elections at every level matter, whether it's a county board that's going to decide, whether there's going to be CAFO in the community, or whether it's a village board in a town of 700 people that's ultimately going to, figure out, what are they going to do about runoff? What are they going to do about agriculture runoff and other issues that exist in smaller communities that don't have the infrastructure to be as resilient as larger communities are. And so at every level, it's definitely not just about president as much as it is about having a president that gets it. It is about local leadership and our state legislative seats, because too often we see, or we had seen before, just attempts to take away local control. And taking away that local control meant that large companies or just polluters in general were able to run roughshod on environmental law or environmental consideration in general. And we can go back to the issue of the ban on plastic bag bans. There were the state legislators that passed that bill, and the former governor signed that into law. And there's so many things that go into that. Something that would seemingly be as innocuous as a ban on plastic bags. Well, you got the petroleum industry who lobbies against it because that's how you make plastic bags. And so we have to press on the people who are seeking office, and even more so those who are already in office who are making the decisions. And this goes just like any other big issue. We have to continue to hold people accountable. And it's not just about the election. The elections are the first step, getting champions elected who want to do the right thing, who are charged to do the right thing. But it's also about holding folks accountable afterwards, because it would seem that a lot of people forget why they ran and who they are actually representing.
Yeah, no, totally. I think you hit this right on the head. I think a lot of times we get caught up in like national politics, which I totally understand. It's more glamorous, the presidency. But I think what affects us more directly and immediately is local and state government. That's really important. And this leads into my next question. What do you think are biggest challenges in achieving our environmental justice goals, our sustainability goals? What are our biggest obstacles, and what are we doing to overcome them?
The biggest obstacles are the state legislature right now, the current makeup of the state legislature, and the White House. The White House is rolling back rules of the EPA every time you turn around. So those are the two biggest roadblocks. And this isn't even to be political, because after people are elected, then they are either going to make the decision to serve in the interests of the people that they represent or not. And unfortunately, right now, they are not.
Totally. That also leads to my next question perfectly. Tell me about like the political landscape in Wisconsin right now. Like it's 2020. We've already had 2 elections this year. We have 2 more on August 11th and then 1 in November as well. Tell me what that looks like, because like Wisconsin is in the limelight right now. What happens in Wisconsin affects the rest of the country as well. So tell me what that looks like, both at like, the state level, local level, and the national level.
Yep, eyes are always going to be on Wisconsin for our implications. We are the swingiest of swing states, and the direction of Wisconsin has typically dictated how the presidential election is going to turn out. But I will say, one thing that we have going for us, not Wisconsin, but the environmental movement in general is that people are paying more attention to it. It is a top 3 polling issue, and that's a good thing. And that's due to the organizing work that's taken place over generations to make that a reality. So I do feel good about the fact that people are being pressed on their environmental agenda. In the Democratic presidential primary, candidates were pressed to have a plan for the environment. It's a good thing. So the more we talk about it, the better. But the more we act on it, even better. But having candidates, like I said, all across the state, because again, it's not just about the presidential, who are making a commitment to environmental justice, who are making a commitment to conservation and stewardship, is something that we all can do. When people knock on the door, when people ask you to donate money, when people ask you to show up to volunteer, it's only fair to ask them if they stand with us on these issues.
Totally. And then right now, I have one more question for you, and then we'll take questions from the audience in the chat. If we could like reimagine a community, what does like a thriving Wisconsin look like to you, and how do we get there?
Yeah, thriving Wisconsin is one that is, it's a state where people don't lack access to healthcare. It's where public transportation is available, safe, walkable communities, where people can have a chance to get outside and enjoy the outdoors, regardless of what part of the state that you reside in. And I think that is probably those are the first two, and also a healthy economy where we do have jobs and we have a chance to create an entirely new green economy. We have a chance to employ people in natural resources, or employ people in renewable energy. And I'll say, right now we have compounded crises like the economic crisis that we're dealing with so many people out of work, and the environmental crisis that we're dealing with, and also the crisis of racial injustice. We have a tremendous opportunity to go a long way. And I know it won't solve everything, but we can go a long way and take out a huge chunk of this problem, or a huge chunk of this 3-layer cake, if we go full steam ahead on a green economy.
Awesome. All right, we'll take some questions from the audience. I already see some in the chat. So if you have any questions, please type them and send them to me, and then I'll read them out for the Lieutenant Governor. All right, so I see one right now. Wisconsin is currently using one of the least renewable energies from our utilities. The change to renewable energies could create a lot of new jobs, so we want to see details in the next 5 years, or general pictures about where we're going on this topic. Will that be wind, solar, or geothermal? Or will that mean more new construction standards for insulation and energy savings?
So I don't think it's an or. It's not a wind, solar, or geothermal. We have to use everything we can. I mean, just being realistic about the situation, there's not enough sun here in Wisconsin year round for that to be reality. But also, I think that it's important to think about building standards as well. We have our new buildings, and I honestly, I don't think that when it comes to publicly subsidized construction projects, if they get a dime of public money, there should be an efficiency component tied to the construction and the end use of that building. I also feel like, we can look at examples like in Iowa, where they've gone all in on wind energy, which has been very beneficial to them, with a Republican governor and a Republican legislature, which shows that, it's possible to get it done here. But some people just need a little bit more convincing for whatever reason. They are being very regressive and not taking on the science there. But we do have our Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, which was created and by executive order. We put it into the state budget last year. It was obviously very promptly taken out by the Republican-controlled Joint Finance Committee, but the governor maintained his commitment to seeing that office become a reality, and he created it through executive order. And the the director of that office, Maria Redmond, is working on our climate plan right now, which should be available soon. And we also have, some other folks over there who are helping her out with that work. But we are going to have a climate plan. And there's the website, climatechange.wi.gov, for anybody that doesn't have that. You can follow the work of the task force, because the task force is going to ultimately send a set of recommendations to the governor to go in the next budget, and just for standalone legislation also. And at first, the recommendations were going to be due in August, but just given the set of circumstances that we're dealing with now, that has been pushed back to the end of October.
Awesome. All right, here I have another question for you from Don. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Barnes, for your efforts on energy and equity going back to the Valley Coal Plant. How do you think communities can focus more on their efforts locally to counter some of built-in systemic problems that don't fully address the inequities we're seeing?
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to speak out. And like I said before, though, a lot of people who are experiencing the most environmental hardship don't always realize that. But it doesn't even mean just, knocking on every door. You can look at aggregate data to see what communities are being impacted and how. And if you have a chance, if you come from a position where you have some ability to talk about these concerns that people are dealing with, then you should use that. You should use that privilege and try to connect with people who are experiencing those issues and dealing with the health impacts, dealing with the economic impacts. This is I think we should be lifelong learners, and this is where we can also help to provide some sort of education to people about what's going on in the world around them if they don't have the chance, the ability, just given whatever set of circumstances they're dealing with, to be able to take it on by themselves.
Thank you. Here's another question from Kevin. What is the administration's plan regarding building a smart electrical grid to handle the future increase in electric vehicle transportation?
Mm-hmm. And that's all the things that are going to be ironed out with the climate plan through the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. It took a while, way longer than we expected or wanted to get that office up and running. But again, we were dealing with a legislature that didn't want to see it happen. And a part of this also is the work of the task force to figure that out. So I don't want to get ahead of the task force or the office on that, but these are all things that are that are being considered by the task force and the office.
Awesome. Here's a question from Cindy. The Walker administration destroyed dozens of acres of wetlands, used eminent domain to take several properties. What is happening with the taxpayer debacle known as Foxconn?
I wish I knew what was going on with Foxconn. And I am as confused as you are. Anybody who has ever followed me on social media knows that I have been a very outspoken critic of the Foxconn deal. One, it just didn't make sense, from an economic standpoint, but two, the environmental degradation that will come as a result of it. And I'm not sure if anybody follows the Foxconn Aerials Twitter account. It looks the same way that it did 2 years ago, basically. And, we keep getting promised, this, that, and the moon, and it never comes to fruition. So I have long stopped, I won't even say I've stopped having confidence in Foxconn. I've never had confidence in Foxconn. I think that we find ourselves, stuck with a huge mess from the last administration when it comes to that project.
Yeah. Here's another question from Sarah. What's a good way to combat incumbent legislators who lie about their position on conservation in a post-truth era where people want to believe persons with whom they associate as being on their team?
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, that's a tough one. It's not easy. I have served with some of those very people you speak of, and I think it's important for, you know, personally us to be sort of, to have our own vigilance when it comes to holding people to account. You know, and I know LCV does a great job, or WCV does a great job of, you know, having report cards for different legislators, and I think that's a perfect place to start. And well, you know, if a person says they did X, Y, Z, well, it's easy to look at that report card and say, no, you didn't. And, you know, they can't debate that. They can't debate whether, you know, they took a bad vote or not, because that's on the record.
Totally. Yes, we're actually working on those scorecards right now. So when we have those done, we'll send them out to our members and to the public, so you can use those to reference. Here's another question from Steve. What will be the impact on rural communities and farmers if we move away from coal? Can that impact be mitigated?
I think that there's opportunity for a lot for our rural communities to gain. When you look at solar arrays, wind farms, and the cost of power to run your farming operation, I think there is far more to gain than there is to lose when it comes to transitioning to a cleaner economy.
I agree. I think there's a lot of potential, especially in our rural communities, because right now Wisconsin's behind our other Midwest neighbors. Yep. When it comes to clean energy. Here's a question from Doreen and Tom. From an environmental standpoint, is the state planning anything to restrict the creation of additional CAFOs in Wisconsin, given the extreme pollution they cause? So just for context, CAFOs are concentrated animal feeding operations. Those are your like those the industrial farms that do on like incredibly large scales. So tell us about what's being done.
Yep. So I personally have not had that in-depth conversation with the governor or our DATCAP or DNR secretary. I know for a fact that Secretary Cole from the DNR, I know where his thoughts are, where his feelings are on that. I know personally, I ejected any new CAFO, so I can say that much, and I can do my best. But I don't see a world where it makes sense to offer permits for more CAFOs, especially as a consolidation of farms has destroyed the idea basically of the family farm here in Wisconsin. That's a huge problem. I think we have to shift that balance, and I think we have to get back to a place where our family farming environment and small farm environment is thriving. And if that means in the absence of CAFOs, then so be it, because they have been completely destructive to rural economies, and they've also been completely destructive to the environment. And it goes back to the whole thing about larger companies and larger operations being able to disregard environmental law with impunity.
Totally. Here's another question. How could the state work with conservative legislators to pass good enough bills to fulfill its goal for conservation and new energies? So tell us about that. How is it working with the other side of the aisle?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of organizing that still has to happen in these communities that these legislators represent, because time and time again, they are voting against the interests of the people that they represent. And this can be, hunters, fishers, because if the trout streams are warming up, you can't fish for trout there. And if there is all sorts of contaminants in the water, what you get out of that water won't be healthy for you. And if we continue to destroy our wooded areas and our wetlands, then that also limits the amount of area that people can hunt. And so they are completely going against the folks that they represent, the people that put them in office. And we have to organize around it.
Yeah, so this question kind of relates to that. Moving forward, how well are the interests of the hunting community are being reflected in DNR management of the deer herd and chronic wasting disease?
Hmm. That's one that's ongoing. There's always more that has to be done when it comes to developing policies, procedures, or even just relationships when it comes to managing herds here in Wisconsin.
Okay, this question is shifting gears a little bit. What are your thoughts about how we enable better public transit to serve all people, and also electric buses, including school buses, where children are being heavily impacted by fumes from vehicles?
Yeah, I've long been a proponent of regional transit, also a proponent of zero emissions buses, but I also, everybody on this call knows about the biggest folly that I hope we ever experience, and that's the turning down of high-speed rail money. I mean, that would have gone a long way. One, to get people back and forth, but two, to also promote the idea of public transit and mass transportation and getting people to and from in something other than a vehicle, something other than a car or truck.
All right, this question is something that we've touched on already, and we've talked about this. From Jeremy, over a dozen cities, counties, and school districts throughout the state have committed to 100% clean energy. And we've talked about this, like the organizing you need to do at the local level in different communities across the state. So the question is, what can the state do to continue on this momentum and support local communities in these goals? Because I really do think that the work that local governments, that local communities are doing, they do send a message to our state elected officials. So what can we do to build on that momentum?
Yeah, I think the best part about it is that the local government across the state doesn't have to worry about preemption, as was the case before. And I've been to a number of climate change task forces in counties across Wisconsin. I want them to know that we are ready to be a resource if they have, complaints, if they have things that they want to be critical about with the administration, fine, so be it. Let's come up with a solution, right? Like, if you're doing the work, we want to be able to help you do the work. And it's not about, being, sensitive to somebody thinking that we're doing something wrong or we're not being adequate in our approach. We genuinely, I know I do, I know the governor feels the same way, and our Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy wants to help, connect our local government to resources, because as it stands, this is how we're going to get to that 100% as a state. When our largest cities, our largest counties are on board, that's how the work happens, because our legislature is the way it's made up. They don't intend to be aggressive on meeting the goals that we need to meet for to create a more sustainable Wisconsin. 2050, that's still too long in my opinion. It's always, anytime I talk about this, I talk about the need for us to push way faster than 2050. We should be looking at 2035. And there's no harm in beating the goal at all. I think we do much better for all of us. We do better for all of ourselves and the state as a whole if the quicker we get this done.
Awesome. Here's another question that we've talked about a little bit, but I love your further insight. So this question is from Karen. You've talked about like inviting people to the table when you talk about climate change and clean energy. So Karen's question is, do you see a role, or what role do you see for Wisconsin's private sector in renewable energy and climate change leadership?
So a lot of the private sector, again, before our election, was already moving in that direction because it was a good financial choice for them on two ends. One, because they can save money on their energy costs. Two, if they can promote themselves as a sustainable business, that attracts customers. People want to spend their money with responsible companies and responsible vendors. People want to know or feel like the place where they buy things from is doing the right thing. So a lot of companies are already pushing forward The private sector, I'm not just going to say they've been doing just the most fantastic job, because they contributed a lot to a lot of the disaster we're dealing with. But as of late, many more are stepping up, answering the call, and being very intentional in promoting their sustainability efforts.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that we need to work on, making sure that we're holding people accountable, but also inviting them to the table to be part of conversation in order to enact change in Wisconsin. So this question's from Roxanne. Is there a way for the state to support the Clean Water Initiative by increasing the funding for lead water line abatement?
We tried to in the budget, but the speaker said that there was too much money going to Milwaukee, as if the highest concentration or the highest overall number of lead laterals wasn't in Milwaukee. If he fancies himself a number guy, he should understand that if there are more lead laterals to move, then obviously there is going to be more money spent in that specific area, wherever it may be. So hear you loud and clear on that. That was something we tried in the budget, and was something that was also blocked by the legislature.
This question is from Rick. Local control is also important to protecting access and availability to state natural resources, state natural areas, state parks, and public lands, hunting and fishing grounds. What can we do at the state level to protect public lands?
Yep. So at the state, we can, that goes down, that's a permit conversation. Ultimately, if local government decides, then the problem is there. But depending on what kind of operation you're talking about, the DNR can accept or reject permit applications.
Here's another question. What opportunities do you see to advance clean energy through the Public Service Commission?
So with the Public Service Commission, I think that that is a really good question. I think the opportunities there are, with grants for low-income neighborhoods. Focus on Energy program is one that works with the private sector, but we also should be thinking about the same way we have our energy assistance programs. We should also have energy reduction and also energy transition programs, because the amount of money that we spend or would spend on energy assistance in a place that is terribly inefficient, we are only costing ourselves more money when we could, instead replace outdated systems and put more resources into weatherization and efficiency.
Here's another question about climate change from Nicole. So Nicole is from Door County. She works with the Climate Change Coalition of Door County, and our mission is to educate the public on the science of climate change, and are usually preaching to the choir. How do we reach the other side and work together to create action to combat climate change?
I think it's a conversation about the next generation, and I think it's for the other side. Unfortunately, the conversation that they respond to is the one about cost, the conversation about economics. And you look at job growth across the country, and job growth is happening in the renewable energy sector, and Wisconsin hasn't had a significant piece of that growth. It's certainly not as much as we should have.
Here's another question. So with climate change, young people, we face the greatest pressure when it comes to climate change. We're the greatest stakeholders in our planet. So what can we do as young people to get involved, to take action? I feel like sometimes that young people are often dismissed when it comes to taking action, getting involved in politics and the environmental movement. What is your recommendation for people in our demographic?
So a lot of it is our own personal interactions, talking to people that we know. And a lot of times young people are unfortunately dismissed, but you see groups and individuals rising up to meet the challenges, and that's a beautiful thing. But I also, don't discount what conversations within how far conversations in our immediate circles go. Those are very important because even though the youth, the younger generation seems to be the most vigilant about this, which is probably true. There's still far too many people that dismiss this as the reality we're dealing with. And so I would say it makes sense to channel and focus a lot of that energy on making sure that the people around us get it.
Here's a question from Maureen. What are your thoughts on the Enbridge Pipeline 5 in northern Wisconsin and their proposed reroute in relationship to environmental impact and eminent domain?
I'm not a fan of pipelines, so I guess keep that one short.
Sounds good. What are we doing to combat pipelines if you're not a fan of them?
Yeah, that is a lot of that rests within our Department of Natural Resources. But Enbridge, if I'm not mistaken, I'm thinking about Back 40 Mine. A lot of it is DNR and our legislators. Like it's the same suspects, right? And it's also the same heroes when it comes to these issues. The same people who are against anything of this ilk are the same ones who are opposed to it. It's the same people every time, right? And so, we ask, what are we doing? It's like we're fighting the same old tired fights over and over again. But we do need to shift the balance of who's having these fights so that we can finally start winning some of these.
Here's another question from Barb. So the preface of this is like Wisconsin, we have like a rich history of like conservation and the environment and advocating for the natural world around us. Barb's question is, how do we best use the 50th anniversary of Earth Day and the Nelson Institute's success stories to inspire Wisconsin citizens?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to take the conversation about environmental stewardship to the communities that need to hear it the most or are impacted the most, both. I think that it's important for us to engage in more low-income communities and more communities of color. I think it's important for us to engage, like you said, communities that are represented by people on the other side of the aisle. Far too often, when we have these conversations, it's always with people that get it. It's always with people who want to do the right thing. And I love talking with y'all. I love being around y'all because, we know that we have this work to do, and it helps to be around people, especially when you get so beat down about it. It brings me joy to be able to have this conversation with you, knowing that we're going to leave this even more committed than we were before. But I still think about the fact that there are so many people who haven't had a chance to be a part of this conversation, who don't necessarily understand what this sort of conversation means for them or their communities. And it's important for us on the 50th anniversary to take on the bigger challenge of casting this net just that much wider.
Awesome. So we only have a couple minutes left, but I want to ask you, today's June 29th, and we do have like these big elections ahead of us. Well, what is your call to action? People who are on this call, who are watching, really care about our state, really care about the environment. So what can we do moving forward and beyond voting, beyond the election? Because the work doesn't stop on election day. That's really where it starts.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to support green sense candidates. And it's also important for us to make sure that the conversation about environmental stewardship, environmental protection, environmental justice is not left out of any debate. Every debate, there should be a question about people's stance on transitioning Wisconsin to a greener economy and putting us back in the position where we are leading in issues of sustainability. And again, I talked before about, this goes beyond elections because we still have to hold people accountable to these ideals, to these principles.
All right. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for joining us this afternoon. And thank you so much to everyone on the call. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to every question, but we appreciate the work you're doing, Lieutenant Governor, and we appreciate everyone in the audience. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.